The British monarchy has stood for over 1,000 years, weathering wars, revolutions, scandals, and seismic cultural shifts. It has crowned kings and queens, buried emperors, and remained a constant thread in the fabric of British identity. But today, in an age defined by transparency, equality, and digital discourse, the future of the monarchy has never been more uncertain or more fascinating. From global controversies to generational change, the crown is at a turning point that could redefine what it means to be royal in the modern world. Welcome to Words of Time. In this video we'll explore the future of the British monarchy, how it has been shaped by past scandals, how it's responding to ongoing public scrutiny, and what might lie ahead for an institution both beloved and questioned by millions. Let's dive in. The British royal family has captivated the world's imagination for centuries. Revered and criticized, adored and dissected, it has endured in the public eye like no other monarchy in modern times. Its history is one woven with splendor and shadow, with centuries of ceremonial grandeur matched by moments of shocking scandal. The British monarchy is far more than just a collection of palaces, jewels, and titles. It is a living institution that has shaped and been shaped by the rise and fall of empires, revolutions, religious conflicts, and societal transformations. The story of the British royal family is one of power and intrigue, a tapestry rich with tradition and laced with controversy. To understand the enduring fascination with the royal family, one must begin by tracing the roots of the monarchy itself. The origins of the British monarchy can be found in the early medieval period, long before the concept of the United Kingdom existed. Anglo-Saxon kings like Alfred the Great and Edward the Confessor laid the foundation for what would become a centralized monarchical state. The Norman conquest of 1066, led by William the Conqueror, brought with it not only a new royal dynasty but a dramatic shift in the structure of power in England. William and his descendants consolidated control, built castles to enforce their rule, and established a hereditary monarchy that would prove to be remarkably enduring. Throughout the centuries that followed, the monarchy continued to evolve. The Plantagenets, Tudors, Stuarts, and Hanoverians each left their imprint on the institution, shaping it according to the needs and values of their times. The monarchy was once the very definition of absolute power, with kings like Henry VIII and Elizabeth I ruling with near total authority. Henry VIII's reign in particular marked a pivotal moment in British history, as he broke away from the Roman Catholic Church to form the Church of England, an act that would have profound religious and political consequences for centuries to come. But the monarchy's authority was never guaranteed. Over time, the crown was forced to yield power to Parliament and the people. The English Civil War of the 17th century ended with the execution of Charles I and a brief period of republican rule under Oliver Cromwell. Though the monarchy was restored in 1660, it returned in a much altered form. The Glorious Revolution of 1688 further cemented the supremacy of Parliament, establishing a constitutional monarchy that continues to this day. The crown still held symbolic and cultural power, but its political power was increasingly circumscribed. Despite these transformations, the royal family remained a potent symbol of national identity and continuity. Monarchs like Queen Victoria embraced their ceremonial role, becoming figureheads of empire and morality. Victoria, who reigned from 1837 and 1901, presided over a vast British empire and became an icon of stability and decency. Her image was carefully managed, and she projected a sense of respectability that helped to rehabilitate the monarchy after earlier scandals and excesses. Under Victoria, the royal family became more domesticated and less overtly political, setting the template for the modern monarchy. Yet for all its pomp and pageantry, the royal family has always been entangled with intrigue and scandal. From medieval feuds and betrayals to modern affairs and media storms, controversy has been a constant companion to the crown. This is not a new phenomenon. The history of the monarchy is littered with betrayals, power grabs, secret marriages, and political maneuvering. Even during times of supposed stability, the royal family was often beset by internal rivalries and public criticism. One of the earliest examples of royal scandal can be found in the reign of Edward II. A weak and ineffective ruler, Edward's close relationships with male favorites such as Piers Gaveston and Hugh Despencer led to widespread suspicion and ultimately rebellion. His wife, Queen Isabella, joined forces with her lover, Roger Mortimer, to overthrow Edward and have him imprisoned, later murdered, according to some sources. This pattern of personal relationships spilling into political turmoil would recur throughout royal history. The tumultuous reign of Henry VIII is another illustration. His 6 marriages, including the execution of 2 of his wives, Catherine Howard and Anne Boleyn, shocked Europe and remain a source of fascination today. His decision to divorce his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, led to England's break with the Catholic Church and sparked a violent religious reformation. Behind the crown were personal desires, rival factions, and dramatic changes that reshaped the nation. Henry's court was a breeding ground for ambition and betrayal, with figures like Thomas More, Thomas Cromwell, and Anne Boleyn rising and falling in a whirl of intrigue. In the centuries that followed, the royal family continued to provide ample fodder for gossip and scandal. George III's bouts of mental illness, the extravagant spending of the Prince Regent, later George IV, and Queen Victoria's intense mourning for Prince Albert all attracted public interest and concern. The 20th century, however, brought an entirely new level of scrutiny. The advent of mass media and tabloid journalism transformed the royal family from distant icons into celebrities, exposing their private lives to an ever-curious public. Edward VIII's resignation in 1936 is perhaps the most famous royal scandal of the modern era. His decision to give up the throne in order to marry Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee, sent shockwaves through Britain and the world. For the first time in modern history, a monarch had prioritized personal happiness over duty, breaking with centuries of tradition. His brother, George VI, stepped into the role and helped to rebuild the monarchy's image during World War II, aided by his wife Elizabeth and their daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth II. Queen Elizabeth II's reign, which began in 1952, was marked by an effort to maintain the dignity and continuity of the monarchy amid immense social and cultural change. She steered the institution through the decline of empire, the rise of mass democracy, and the challenges of a modern media landscape. But even her long and stable reign could not shield the royal family from scandal. The marriages of her children, particularly that of Prince Charles and Princess Diana, brought renewed attention and criticism to the Windsors. The marriage of Charles and Diana began as a fairy tale and ended in tragedy. Their union was plagued by incompatibility and infidelity. Diana's struggles within the royal family and her eventual separation from Charles captivated the public. Her openness about her mental health issues and her humanitarian work earned her global admiration, while also exposing the coldness and rigidity of royal life. The couple's very public divorce and Diana's untimely death in 1997 marked a turning point in the monarchy's relationship with the public. The royal family was seen as out of touch, and the Queen's delayed response to Diana's death prompted widespread criticism. In the decades since, the royal family has sought to modernize and adapt to changing times. Younger royals like Prince William and Prince Harry initially brought a sense of renewal and relatability. Their marriages to commoners Catherine Middleton and Meghan Markle were seen as signs of a more inclusive and modern monarchy. Yet even this new generation has not been immune to controversy. The departure of Harry and Meghan from royal duties in 2020, their subsequent interviews and allegations of racism within the institution reignited debates about the monarchy's relevance and accountability. These scandals, both historic and contemporary, have done little to diminish the global fascination with the British royal family. If anything, they have added layers to the public's engagement. The royals are not merely ceremonial figures. They are symbols of a nation's history, reflections of societal change, and subjects of constant media scrutiny. Their personal lives intersect with national narratives in ways that few other institutions can claim. From medieval courts to modern tabloids, the royal family has remained at the center of Britain's cultural and political life. What makes the British monarchy unique is its ability to endure. It has survived wars, revolutions, assassinations, divorces, and endless waves of public opinion. Each generation of royals faces the challenge of balancing tradition with modernity, duty with personal happiness, and public expectations with private desires. That balance is precarious and often contested, but it is also what keeps the monarchy relevant. In many ways, the British royal family functions as a mirror for the nation. Their lives, though steeped in privilege, reflect broader social anxieties and aspirations. Issues of class, gender, race, and identity play out within the royal family in ways that resonate with the public. The royal scandals, therefore, are not just personal failures. They are moments of national reflection and conversation. The enduring appeal of the royal family lies not in its perfection, but in its imperfection. The pageantry, the protocol, the jewels and carriages, these are the surface elements. Beneath them lies a very human story of power, pressure, and perseverance. It is this human drama, played out on a grand stage, that keeps audiences around the world watching, speculating, and caring. Whether one sees the monarchy as a vital institution or an outdated relic, there is no denying its cultural impact. The history of the British royal family is a saga of power and intrigue. It is the story of how an ancient institution has navigated the shifting tides of history, maintaining its place through adaptability, symbolism, and at times sheer luck. It is also a story of people flawed, fascinating, and very much in the public eye. As long as the monarchy endures, so too will the stories of scandal and splendor that define it. Few events in the modern history of the British monarchy have sent shockwaves through the institution, the nation, and the world quite like the abdication of Edward VIII. In December 1936, less than a year into his reign, Edward renounced the throne to marry the woman he loved, Wallis Simpson, an American divorcee. The decision shattered centuries-old traditions and cast into stark relief the conflict between personal desire and royal duty. What might have seemed like a deeply personal choice was, in fact, a profoundly political act, one that exposed the monarchy's vulnerability, reshaped public expectations, and set the tone for the royal family's relationship with the media and modernity for generations to come. Edward VIII was not an ordinary monarch. Born in 1894 to the future George V and Queen Mary, Edward was heir to the throne during a period of significant social and political change. By the time he became king in January 1936, following the death of his father, Edward was already a well-known and, in some circles, controversial figure. As Prince of Wales, he had cultivated an image of youthful charisma and modern flair. He traveled widely, championed causes like housing reform and poverty relief, and maintained a visible presence in the media. His popularity among the general public stood in contrast to the more restrained and traditional style of his father. However, behind the glamour was a man who chafed against the constraints of his role. Edward disliked many of the formalities and responsibilities that came with royalty. He was known for a playboy lifestyle, surrounding himself with socialites and pursuing romantic relationships with married women. Chief among them was Wallis Warfield Simpson, an American socialite who had already been divorced once and was in the process of ending her second marriage when she became seriously involved with Edward. Their relationship, which began in the early 1930s, quickly grew into a passionate affair. Wallis was witty, fashionable, and confident, traits that Edward admired deeply. But to the British establishment she was a wholly unacceptable consort for a king. The Church of England, of which Edward would be the supreme governor as monarch, did not allow the remarriage of divorced persons if their former spouses were still living. Wallis had 2 living ex-husbands. This religious doctrine, combined with prevailing social mores and political concerns, made a marriage between the king and Wallis impossible in the eyes of the government and much of the public. By the time Edward took the throne, his relationship with Wallis was already well known among political elites, foreign dignitaries, and members of the press. In Britain, however, a tacit agreement between the monarchy and the media, particularly the British press, kept the affair out of public view. British newspapers refrained from reporting on the romance, although the international press, particularly in the United States, covered it extensively. As the relationship deepened, the pressure on Edward to make a decision grew unbearable. In the autumn of 1936, Edward informed Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin of his intention to marry Wallis Simpson. Baldwin, representing both the government and the will of the British establishment, informed the king that such a marriage was not politically or constitutionally acceptable. A morganatic marriage, one in which Wallis would not become queen and any potential children would not inherit the throne, was briefly considered but ultimately rejected. The king was presented with a stark choice: end the relationship or abdicate the throne. Edward chose the latter. In a statement broadcast to the nation on December 11, 1936, he explained his decision with the now famous words, "I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of responsibility and to discharge my duties as king as I would wish to do without the help and support of the woman I love." With that, Edward became the only British monarch in history to voluntarily relinquish the crown. His younger brother, Albert, took the throne as King George VI, adopting a more sober and traditional style that helped stabilize the monarchy in the turbulent years that followed. The abdication sent tremors through British society. At its heart, it was not simply a romantic gesture but a constitutional crisis. The idea that the king, whose duty it was to embody the stability and continuity of the nation, could place personal happiness above obligation struck many as deeply troubling. For conservatives, it confirmed their worst fears about Edward's unsuitability for the role. His modern style and personal recklessness had long worried the establishment. For others, especially abroad, it was a moment of fascination, a royal love story unlike any other. Politically, the abdication tested the limits of monarchy within a constitutional framework. It laid bare the fact that, despite the ceremonial trappings, a king could not act entirely as he pleased. The monarch was no longer an absolute ruler but a figurehead expected to act in accordance with political consensus and public values. In this light, Edward's insistence on marrying Wallis against the advice of his ministers was seen as an act of defiance, one that could not be tolerated if the monarchy was to retain its legitimacy. The abdication also had significant implications for Britain's standing in the world. At a time of rising fascism in Europe and increasing global instability, the British government could not afford a distracted or divisive monarch. There were already concerns about Edward's political leanings, particularly his reported admiration for Hitler and Nazi Germany. His views were never entirely clear, but his actions such as a visit to Germany in 1937 where he and Wallis were photographed meeting Adolf Hitler raised uncomfortable questions about his judgment and loyalties. Socially, the scandal illuminated changing attitudes toward love, marriage and morality. While the British establishment clung to traditional values, there was a growing segment of society, particularly among younger and more cosmopolitan individuals, that saw Edward's actions as a courageous affirmation of personal choice. This tension between duty and self-expression, between tradition and modernity, would continue to play out in royal narratives for decades to come. The media's role in the crisis cannot be overstated. Though British papers had initially honored a self-imposed blackout, the global coverage of the affair and the public's growing curiosity eventually made silence impossible. The abdication forced the British press to acknowledge a reality that many of their readers already suspected. It marked a turning point in the relationship between the royal family and the media, setting the stage for the more aggressive and intrusive coverage that would characterize royal reporting in the second half of the 20th century. In the years following the abdication, Edward and Wallis lived largely in exile, taking on the titles of Duke and Duchess of Windsor. Though they were feted in some circles, they remained somewhat ostracized by the royal family and British officialdom. Their marriage, which lasted until Edward's death in 1972, was by most accounts stable, though often marked by a sense of bitterness and loss. The Duke never fully reconciled with his family, and he spent much of his life writing memoirs and granting interviews in an effort to justify his actions. The long-term consequences of Edward's abdication were profound. In the immediate aftermath, it thrust his brother George VI onto the throne, an introverted man who was unprepared for kingship but who rose to the occasion with quiet dignity. George VI, with the support of his wife Elizabeth and the guidance of Winston Churchill during World War II, helped to restore public confidence in the monarchy. His steadfastness during the Blitz, his refusal to flee London, and his symbolic leadership in wartime earned him widespread admiration. This rehabilitated image of monarchy as stable, dutiful, and morally upright stood in deliberate contrast to the turmoil of Edward's brief reign. George VI's example helped pave the way for the long and remarkably consistent reign of his daughter, Queen Elizabeth II. The legacy of Edward's abdication was, in this sense, twofold. It revealed the vulnerabilities of the institution, but also spurred a period of recalibration and renewal. Public perceptions of Edward and Wallis have fluctuated over time. For decades they were viewed with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Edward's critics saw him as selfish and reckless, while Wallis was often portrayed as an opportunist or even a threat to national security. More recently, revisionist views have emerged, painting them as tragic figures caught in an impossible situation. In this narrative, Edward is a man who dared to defy tradition in pursuit of love, while Wallis is a scapegoat for a society unwilling to accept a new form of royal partnership. The abdication also left a deep imprint on how the royal family approached marriage and personal relationships in the years to come. The lessons of 1936 loomed large over the lives of subsequent royals. Princess Margaret, the sister of Queen Elizabeth II, was famously prevented from marrying Group Captain Peter Townsend, a divorced man, because of the potential constitutional implications. Decades later, Prince Charles and Princess Diana's ill-fated marriage was influenced, in part, by the lingering pressures of marrying within the expectations of duty rather than personal compatibility. Even in 2005, marriage of Charles to Camilla Parker Bowles, herself a divorcee, took place in a climate shaped by the shadow of Edward VIII. By then, public attitudes had shifted significantly, and the union was broadly accepted. But the cautious and subdued nature of the ceremony, held in a civil setting followed by a blessing rather than a grand church wedding, reflected lingering sensitivities. Perhaps the most direct echo of the abdication scandal came in the experience of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Their decision to step back from royal duties, their move to the United States, and their candid revelations about the pressures of royal life bear undeniable parallels to Edward and Wallis's trajectory. While the circumstances are very different, Both cases highlight the ongoing tension between personal freedom and institutional expectations within the royal family. Ultimately, the abdication of Edward VIII remains one of the most defining moments in the history of the British monarchy. It exposed the limits of royal autonomy, the power of public opinion, and the importance of perception. It forced the monarchy to adapt, reassert its values, and become more attuned to the expectations of its subjects. It also embedded within the royal narrative a theme that continues to resonate: the human struggle between love and duty, between self and service. Though more than 8 decades have passed since Edward signed the instrument of abdication, the questions it raised are still relevant. How much freedom should a monarch have in their personal life? To what extent should tradition give way to modern values? And how can an ancient institution remain relevant in a rapidly changing world? The answers to these questions remain elusive, but the legacy of Edward VIII's choice ensures that they will not be forgotten. Edward's abdication was more than a romantic gesture. It was a rupture in the royal timeline, a seismic event that changed the course of the monarchy and reshaped its future. It introduced new vulnerabilities, but it also prompted necessary introspection. The story of Edward and Wallis is not just a tale of forbidden love, it is a cautionary episode in the life of an institution that is both revered and contested. It reminds us that even the highest positions of power are held by people, and that those people are capable of decisions that ripple through history in unexpected and enduring ways. Princess Margaret, the younger sister of Queen Elizabeth II, was born into a world of immense privilege but rigid expectations. In the early 1950s, she was one of the most glamorous and popular royals, beautiful, stylish, witty, and fiercely independent. Around this time, she formed a close bond with Group Captain Peter Townsend, a decorated RAF officer and royal courtier. He was a war hero, a gentleman, and someone who shared many of Margaret's values and interests. Their relationship developed while Townsend was serving as an equerry to her father, King George VI, and later Queen Elizabeth II. Despite their growing affection, Townsend's personal life became an obstacle. He was a divorce, having ended a marriage that produced 2 children, and that fact alone made him an unsuitable match in the eyes of the British establishment. By 1953, their affection had turned into a serious romantic connection. Margaret, just 22 years old at the time, was very much in love. The romance, however, was not just a matter of private affection. It was a national issue. With the coronation of her sister as Queen Elizabeth II in 1953 and the post-war nation rebuilding itself, any deviation from traditional moral expectations was viewed as potentially damaging to the crown. The relationship remained mostly private until it exploded into public view during the Queen's coronation celebrations in June 1953. A now famous moment occurred when Margaret was caught on camera brushing a piece of lint from Townsend's uniform, a simple gesture, but one that sent the press into a frenzy. The public and the media were suddenly enthralled, and speculation ran rampant about an impending engagement. What might have been a simple love story became a full-blown constitutional dilemma. British society at the time still maintained strict moral standards, especially for members of the royal family. The Church of England, of which the monarch is supreme governor, forbade the remarriage of divorced persons if their former spouses were still alive. Townsend's ex-wife was still living, which posed a religious and moral issue. Additionally, the Royal Marriages Act of 1772 required the sovereign's consent for any royal family member to marry. Queen Elizabeth, though fond of her sister, was also bound by her duty to uphold the constitutional norms of the monarchy. The romance between Margaret and Townsend collided with a deeply conservative post-war Britain. Although the country had changed in many ways after World War II, attitudes around marriage, duty, and class remained inflexible. Divorce carried enormous stigma, and marrying a divorced man was seen by many as immoral, particularly for a senior royal. There was also concern about the image of the monarchy. Queen Elizabeth II had just assumed the throne, and the monarchy was attempting to project an image of moral authority and continuity. A scandal involving the Queen's own sister marrying a divorce would have undermined that image, especially in the wake of the 1936 abdication of Edward VIII, who gave up the throne to Mary Wallis Simpson, a twice-divorced American. Adding to the tension was the British government's role. Prime Minister Winston Churchill and his successors were reportedly opposed to the match, fearing it would diminish the monarchy's reputation. Moreover, Britain's status as head of the Commonwealth included countries where divorce was heavily frowned upon, further complicating the political consequences of such a union. As a result, Margaret and Townsend were separated. In a diplomatic move meant to cool the situation, Townsend was assigned to a 2-year posting as heir attaché in Brussels. It was a quiet exile, meant to give both parties time to reconsider and for the furor to die down. During Townsend's time abroad, Margaret and he exchanged letters and continued to nurture hopes of marriage. Public sentiment was largely on their side. When Townsend returned to Britain in 1955, rumors of an imminent engagement swirled again. By then, Margaret was over 25, meaning she no longer needed the Queen's formal consent under the Royal Marriages Act. In theory, she could marry Townsend if she gave up her royal status and privileges. For a brief moment, it appeared that Margaret might defy expectations. Newspapers speculated daily on whether she would sacrifice her title and royal income for love. But on October 31, 1955, in a public statement read by Margaret herself, she announced the relationship was over. She stated that she had decided not to marry Townsend out of loyalty to the church and a sense of duty to the monarchy. This announcement stunned the public and devastated those who had rooted for a modern fairy tale ending. The tone of Margaret's statement was dignified, but many believed the pressure had simply been too great. Townsend himself later reflected that their love had been doomed from the start. Despite the official narrative, many saw it as a sacrifice made under coercion. The end of her relationship with Townsend marked a turning point in Margaret's life. Though she later married Anthony Armstrong-Jones, a photographer who became the Earl of Snowdon, it was a complicated and ultimately unhappy union. Their marriage, which produced 2 children, was marked by tensions, affairs, and increasing emotional distance. They divorced in 1978, the first divorce of a senior royal since Henry VIII. Margaret never seemed to recover the emotional grounding she had with Townsend. In later years, she cultivated an image as a glamorous but troubled royal, smoking heavily, drinking excessively, and maintaining a string of often tabloid-fueled romantic affairs. Though she remained loyal to her sister and fulfilled royal duties, her life was often marked by sadness, scandal, and perceived personal dissatisfaction. Observers and biographers have often pointed to the Townsend saga as the emotional wound that never fully healed. It represented the moment Margaret was forced to choose between her heart and her role, and many believe the burden of that choice left her emotionally adrift for much of her life. Margaret's doomed romance with Townsend had a broader significance beyond her personal heartbreak. It became a cautionary tale within royal circles, a reminder of how private desires must be reconciled with public responsibilities. For the monarchy, it reinforced a commitment to traditionalism and moral conservatism in the 1950s. Yet it also hinted at the costs of such rigidity. Public sympathy for Margaret remained strong, but the royal family's handling of the affair drew criticism. Many saw it as yet another example of an institution unwilling to adapt to changing social norms. However, the monarchy managed to survive the scandal relatively intact, largely because Queen Elizabeth maintained a reputation for duty and decorum that helped shield the institution from broader backlash. In the decades that followed, however, the royal family faced increasing scrutiny over its role in suppressing individual happiness for the sake of duty. Margaret's story laid the emotional groundwork for future debates over royal marriages, including those of Charles and Diana, and later Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. In recent years, interest in Princess Margaret's relationship with Townsend has resurfaced thanks to biographies, documentaries, and dramatizations like The Crown. These depictions have portrayed Margaret not merely as a tragic figure but as a symbol of the human cost of monarchy. Some historians argue that had Margaret married Townsend, it might have initiated a gradual modernization of royal attitudes toward marriage and personal freedom. Instead, the refusal to permit their union delayed those changes for decades. Others view her story as emblematic of the monarchy's survival instincts, sacrificing individual members for the sake of institutional continuity. Regardless of interpretation, Margaret and Townsend's relationship is remembered as one of the great what-ifs of royal history. Their love affair, while short-lived, exposed the monarchy's vulnerabilities and challenged its moral authority at a time when Britain was struggling to redefine itself in the post-imperial world. In the modern era, the British royal family has undergone a profound transformation, shaped not only by the natural course of history and generational change but also by the intensifying lens of media scrutiny and a rapidly evolving societal context. Once a symbol of untouchable grandeur and imperial permanence, the monarchy has increasingly found itself needing to reconcile its age-old traditions with contemporary expectations of transparency, relevance, and human vulnerability. From the mid-20th century to the present, the royal family has lived through a series of seismic shifts, some cultural, some political, and others deeply personal, that have redefined its public image and tested its resilience in ways the Crown has rarely experienced before. The role of the media in shaping the modern monarchy cannot be overstated. While the press has always held an interest in royal affairs, the nature of that interest evolved dramatically in the post-war years. What had once been reverential reporting gave way to a far more aggressive and intrusive approach, especially as tabloids gained influence in the UK and beyond. The public's appetite for royal stories, whether celebratory, scandalous, or speculative, meant that the press had both motive and opportunity to dig deeper into the lives of individual royals. What emerged from this heightened media scrutiny was a more complicated, less mythic picture of royalty. The members of the family, rather than appearing as distant symbols of national unity, were increasingly seen as fallible individuals, capable of great emotion but also embroiled in very human dramas. In a society that was itself becoming more individualistic and media-driven, the monarchy's every move was subject to instant, often brutal, commentary. No event better illustrates the tension between media exposure and royal tradition than the breakdown of the marriage between Prince Charles and Princess Diana. At first, the union was celebrated as a fairy tale romance between the heir to the throne and a young woman of noble but non-royal lineage. However, as time progressed, the cracks in the relationship became public knowledge. Diana, already a media darling, captivated the public with her grace and charisma but also with her vulnerability and candor. Her 1995 BBC interview with Martin Bashir marked a turning point not just for the marriage but for the monarchy itself. In speaking openly about her mental health struggles, feelings of isolation, and Charles's ongoing relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, Diana broke through the traditionally silent and stoic royal mold. Her statement that "there were three of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded," sent shockwaves through the institution and confirmed suspicions that had lingered for years. The subsequent divorce in 1996, and Diana's tragic death in 1997, intensified the crisis. The royal family's slow and muted response to Diana's death drew sharp criticism from the public and press alike, with many accusing the Queen and her advisors of being emotionally out of step with the nation's grief. The aftermath of Diana's death represented a pivotal moment for the royal family, forcing a reckoning with public expectations in a way that few internal developments ever had. It was a rare instance when the palace was compelled to shift course visibly and swiftly. The Queen eventually addressed the nation live on television, a rare and powerful gesture that helped to quell growing discontent. Yet the damage had already left its mark. The notion that the royal family was above emotional expression or immune to public sentiment was irrevocably altered. In the years that followed, the royals began a slow process of recalibration. There were efforts to appear more relatable, to engage more directly with the public, and to allow younger members of the family, such as Princes William and Harry, to cultivate a more modern image. These changes were not just cosmetic. They reflected a deeper shift in strategy, as the monarchy realized that survival in the 21st century required a degree of openness and humanity that previous generations had actively avoided. However, this evolving openness did not shield the monarchy from further scandal. The 21st century brought with it a host of new challenges, including a far more connected and judgmental digital public. While the previous generation had contended primarily with print tabloids and television news, modern royals now had to navigate the pitfalls of social media, 24-hour news cycles, and the global reach of online commentary. One of the most damaging and high-profile scandals of recent years has involved Prince Andrew, Duke of York. Once considered a war hero and a steady, if unremarkable, figure within the royal lineup, Andrew's reputation took a nosedive with his association with the late financier and convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Andrew's connection to Epstein had long been the subject of rumor and speculation, but the situation escalated dramatically when Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's accusers, filed a civil lawsuit alleging that Andrew had sexually abused her when she was a minor, allegation he has consistently denied. The crisis peaked in 2019 with Andrew's now infamous BBC Newsnight interview, during which he attempted to clarify his relationship with Epstein and deny the allegations. The interview, rather than exonerating him, was widely regarded as disastrous. His demeanor was criticized as detached and arrogant, and several of his claims, such as his inability to sweat due to a medical condition, became fodder for public mockery. More importantly, the interview failed to address the gravity of the allegations or show empathy for Epstein's victims. In the aftermath, Andrew was effectively sidelined from royal duties, and public pressure led to the stripping of many of his titles and honors. The episode was a significant blow to the royal family's image, particularly as it occurred during a period when the institution was already trying to modernize and rebuild trust. The royal family's response to the Andrew scandal was notably swift and definitive compared to its slower reactions in the past. Buckingham Palace worked to distance the institution from the Duke of York's personal issues, and efforts were made to frame the scandal as an individual failing rather than a systemic one. While this approach helped contain the immediate fallout, it also underscored the fragile tightrope the monarchy must walk in the modern era. Scandals are no longer easily brushed aside, and accountability, at least in the eyes of the public, must be demonstrated, even if not legally enforced. At the same time, the royal family's attempts to project unity and resilience have not always been successful. Public trust remains fragile, and each new controversy risks undoing years of carefully managed public relations work. Another major inflection point in the monarchy's recent history has been the departure of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle from their roles as senior royals. Dubbed Meghan by the media, their decision to step back from royal duties and relocate to North America created shockwaves across the Commonwealth and beyond. The couple cited relentless media intrusion, lack of institutional support, and racial bias as core reasons for their departure. Their explosive interview with Oprah Winfrey in 2021 further widened the rift between them and the rest of the royal family. In that conversation, Meghan revealed she had experienced suicidal thoughts while pregnant and alleged that a member of the royal household had expressed concerns over the skin color of her unborn child. These claims, combined with Harry's criticisms of his father and brother, painted a deeply unflattering picture of life inside the royal bubble. The reaction to Harry and Meghan's interview was polarized. Some viewed them as courageous whistleblowers, speaking truth to an outdated institution. Others saw them as disloyal and opportunistic, airing private grievances on a global stage. For the monarchy, the interview marked yet another public crisis that demanded careful damage control. Buckingham Palace issued a brief but notable statement affirming that recollections may vary, while expressing sympathy for the couple's hardships. Still, the division between Harry and the rest of his family appeared deep and unresolved. The situation raised urgent questions about the monarchy's ability to adapt to modern values of mental health awareness, inclusivity, and emotional expression, all areas in which the institution had historically lagged. As British society continues to diversify and demand greater accountability from its institutions, the monarchy finds itself at a crossroads. The passing of Queen Elizabeth II in 2022 marked the end of an era, one defined by stoicism, continuity, and restraint. Her long reign had served as a stabilizing force amid tumultuous times, and her death created both an emotional and symbolic vacuum. The accession of King Charles III ushered in a new chapter, one that must contend with the dual pressures of legacy and change. Charles, long seen as a forward-thinking royal with interests in the environment and interfaith dialogue, now faces the daunting task of guiding an institution that is both venerated and scrutinized in equal measure. With the crown now resting on King Charles III, the expectations of modernity and reform have never been greater. His reign began not just with the ceremonial duties of a new monarch but also with the burdens of perception, memory, and cultural significance. Charles is an unusual figure in royal history not merely because of the longevity of his apprenticeship, but also because of the complex reputation that has followed him throughout his adult life. Much of the British public still associates him with the collapse of his first marriage to Diana, Princess of Wales, and the decades-long relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles that ran parallel to it. Over time, Camilla has been gradually accepted by the public and the royal establishment, eventually assuming the role of queen consort. Yet the memories of Diana and the emotional loyalty she continues to command create a subtle tension that continues to affect how Charles is perceived, particularly among older generations who remember the 1990 media storms in vivid detail. Nonetheless, Charles has managed to craft a persona that in some ways is better suited to the present age than previous monarchs. His decades-long commitment to environmental causes, organic farming, climate advocacy, and architectural preservation, all once seen as eccentric passions, have now become more mainstream concerns. He speaks with a level of intellectual curiosity and personal conviction that, while not typical of past sovereigns, aligns with the broader shift towards socially conscious leadership. However, the transition from Prince of Wales to King is not merely ceremonial. As sovereign, Charles must now refrain from the outspoken commentary that characterized much of his public life. He must instead embody the apolitical neutrality expected of a constitutional monarch, an adjustment that may prove challenging for someone who has long taken a more activist role. The monarchy's relevance in modern Britain also faces scrutiny from younger generations who increasingly question the purpose and cost of the royal institution. Polling data in recent years shows a gradual decline in support among those under 30, many of whom view the monarchy as an outdated relic rather than a necessary part of national identity. This generational shift is compounded by the broader social forces that define modern Britain: growing multiculturalism, secularization, economic disparity, and political skepticism. The pomp and circumstance of royal life, once a source of national pride and continuity, can seem tone-deaf in an era marked by calls for transparency, equity, and representation. In this climate, scandals that might have been absorbed or buried in previous eras now take on amplified significance, and public forgiveness is no longer guaranteed. The institution has sought to address these challenges in part through the younger generation of royals, particularly Prince William and Catherine, the Prince and Princess of Wales. They have been positioned as the future of the monarchy, relatable, modern, and socially engaged. Their public image is carefully managed to present a balance of tradition and accessibility. Catherine, in particular, has been praised for her poised and consistent public presence, while William has taken on increasingly prominent royal duties and continues to champion causes such as mental health awareness, homelessness, and the environment. Together, they have stepped into the roles that once belonged to Charles and Diana, albeit in a more media-conscious and cautious fashion. However, even this image of stability was shaken in early 2024 when Catherine temporarily withdrew from public life for medical treatment, sparking a media frenzy and widespread speculation about her condition. The palace's lack of detailed communication during this period inadvertently fueled online conspiracy theories and renewed criticism about royal transparency. Although she later re-emerged and addressed the public directly in a heartfelt message, the episode illustrated the fine line the royals must walk between privacy and public responsibility. In a time where information flows instantly and public trust is easily lost, even the smallest communications misstep can have outsized consequences. The episode also reminded many of Diana's media experience decades earlier how intense public curiosity, fueled by insufficient clarity, can quickly turn admiration into suspicion or even hostility. Parallel to the efforts of William and Catherine, the royal family has also grappled with the widening rift between Prince Harry and the rest of his relatives. Harry's 2023 memoir, Spare, laid bare years of personal grievance, rivalry, and emotional turmoil. He described growing up in the shadow of his older brother, feeling like an expendable member of the family, and experiencing deep trauma from the loss of his mother. The memoir also detailed disputes with his father and stepmother and cast further light on the reasons behind his and Meghan's decision to leave royal life behind. While the book was commercially successful and resonated with many readers who sympathized with Harry's search for identity and healing, it further strained his ties with the monarchy. It became clear that reconciliation would not come easily, if at all. The broader consequence of these revelations is not just interpersonal fallout but institutional strain. The royal family functions in part on the premise of unity, discretion, and continuity. When internal tensions are made public, especially in such detail and with such emotional rawness, it threatens the very mythology that sustains the monarchy's symbolic power. Furthermore, the polarization of public opinion between those who support the Sussexes and those who remain loyal to the traditional royal image has created a cultural divide that mirrors the broader political and generational fractures within British society. The monarchy, once a unifying force, now risks becoming yet another site of national contention. Yet despite all the controversies, resignations, media storms, and personal crises, the royal family continues to endure. It has weathered constitutional crises, divorces, deaths, and exiles. It has reinvented itself time and again, adjusting its public image to fit the sensibilities of different eras. What has changed most in recent decades is not necessarily the monarchy itself, but the lens through which it is viewed. The public is no longer content to receive carefully curated images of royal perfection. They demand authenticity, accountability, and a sense that their symbolic leaders understand the world they live in. This expectation places immense pressure on the individuals within the royal system, who must embody both the mystique of monarchy and the relatability of modern celebrities. Even so, the monarchy retains a unique kind of cultural capital that few other institutions possess. Its ceremonial role in state functions, its historical lineage, and its emotional connection to national identity remain potent, especially during times of collective uncertainty or celebration. The Platinum Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II and the coronation of King Charles III both demonstrated that, for all the skepticism and criticism, there remains a deep reservoir of public affection and interest. These events drew millions of viewers, sparked widespread festivities, and temporarily quieted the voices of republicanism and reform. In those moments, the monarchy reaffirmed its position as both spectacle and symbol, a living bridge between Britain's past and its future. Despite the enduring ceremonial appeal of the monarchy, the royal family must navigate an increasingly complex and often skeptical world, where traditions are constantly re-evaluated through the lens of modern values. In many ways, the institution has become a mirror for broader societal debates. Questions about gender roles, privilege, race, mental health, and even the nature of public service is all reflected in the lives and choices of its members. This has forced the monarchy to be both reactive and adaptive, shedding some of its older, more rigid customs in favor of a more flexible and empathetic public image. Yet every change, however carefully introduced, brings new scrutiny. The very act of adapting raises questions about authenticity, while resistance to change risks being seen as stubbornness or tone-deafness. Public perception of the royal family today is deeply fragmented. Some citizens continue to cherish the monarchy as a cultural cornerstone, a symbol of continuity and unity in an ever-changing world. For these supporters, the royal family is a living link to centuries of British history and tradition, a pageant of identity that transcends politics. For others, however, the institution increasingly feels like a relic of another age, propped up by outdated notions of class and entitlement. The idea that individuals can be born into national importance, enjoy taxpayer-funded privileges, and wield soft power purely by virtue of heritage strikes many as incompatible with modern democratic ideals. This tension has fueled not only cultural criticism but also political debate, particularly in periods of economic hardship when the cost of maintaining the royal household becomes a point of contention. Amid this complex backdrop, the royal family has sought to modernize not just through public relations efforts but also by redefining its role in British civic life. In recent years, royals have placed greater emphasis on charitable work, community engagement, and mental health advocacy, areas where the Crown can be seen as relevant and compassionate rather than aloof. Initiatives like the Royal Foundation's Heads Together campaign, championed by Prince William, Catherine, and Prince Harry before his departure, aim to destigmatize conversations around mental health and illustrate a more emotionally connected form of royal leadership. These efforts represent a conscious pivot away from the stoicism that once defined royal conduct, toward a model of service based on empathy and openness. This shift has had a mixed reception. While many have welcomed the more human and involved version of royalty, others have questioned how deep this transformation truly runs. The monarchy still depends on hierarchy, tradition, and a clear separation from ordinary life. It must balance emotional expression with decorum, accessibility with mystique. That balance has proven difficult to maintain, particularly in a media landscape that thrives on contradiction and controversy. Every royal appearance is dissected for hidden meaning, every absence questioned, every gesture compared to a past precedent. This constant surveillance makes authenticity difficult to achieve, or at least to sustain without contradiction. Nowhere is this challenge more evident than in the increasingly global stage upon which the royal family must operate. While the British monarchy remains a national institution, it also holds symbolic significance across the Commonwealth, a political and cultural legacy of empire that is itself undergoing intense re-examination. Several countries, including Barbados, have recently moved to sever formal ties with the British Crown, choosing instead to become republics. Others, such as Australia and Jamaica, have active republican movements that question the value and symbolism of having a foreign monarch as head of state. In these contexts, the royal family's legacy is not just about tradition but about colonial history, cultural dominance, and post-imperial identity. The monarchy's response to this shifting global sentiment has been cautious but noticeable. Recent royal tours have attempted to highlight cultural diplomacy, historical acknowledgement, and shared values rather than imperial nostalgia. Yet efforts to modernize the Commonwealth relationship have often been undermined by protests, public backlash, and the sheer weight of historical memory. For the monarchy to remain relevant internationally, it must do more than perform symbolic gestures. It must reckon with the complexities of its own past in a way that acknowledges pain without diminishing tradition. This is a delicate task, made more difficult by the global accessibility of royal scandals and the competing demands of different audiences. Back home in the UK, the future of the monarchy may well depend on the actions and choices of the younger generation. Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis represent not just the future of the family but of the institution itself. How they are raised, what values they are taught, and the kind of public roles they are eventually given will all shape the monarchy's next chapter. Their parents, William and Catherine, are acutely aware of the pressures and opportunities that come with this responsibility. They have been deliberate in protecting their children from overexposure while gradually introducing them to public life. The goal is to prepare them for a future in which the crown may look very different, less rigid, more accountable, and perhaps even more symbolic than executive. Yet even as the future is carefully curated, the present remains fragile. The monarchy is now an institution constantly negotiating its own boundaries between privacy and publicity, duty and personal freedom, tradition and reform. These negotiations play out not just behind palace walls but in the public square, in newsrooms, online forums, social media platforms, and academic debates. It is no longer enough for the royal family to exist above the fray. They are in it whether they like it or not. And within this new reality, every decision, every public statement, and every private misstep carries disproportionate weight. The modern royal family is thus both a product and a victim of its visibility. The very thing that ensures its relevance, constant public attention, is also what renders it vulnerable. Its members are expected to be paragons of virtue and yet relatable, to uphold age-old customs while embodying progressive values, to symbolize unity while representing an institution born of inequality. These are contradictions that are impossible to resolve completely, but they must be managed skillfully if the monarchy is to endure. The continued fascination with royal life, from weddings and births to controversies and interviews, shows that the public is still invested in the story. But it also reveals an appetite for substance as much as spectacle. The royal family's survival in the 21st century increasingly depends on its ability to balance transparency with mystique, duty with relatability, and history with change. These are not simply communication strategies. They speak to the core of what monarchy means in a democratic, globalized world. The very definition of royal legitimacy is shifting from a once unquestioned birthright to a more performance-based model of public service and symbolic leadership. In this sense, modern monarchy has become a kind of tightrope act, constantly performing stability while adapting under pressure, defending relevance while enduring deep public scrutiny, and preserving dignity while facing scandals that would have once remained private or suppressed. One of the most defining characteristics of this modern era is the role of media, not just as an observer but as a participant. The proliferation of social media platforms, 24/7 news cycles, and online commentary has created a dynamic in which every appearance, every statement, and every rumor is subjected to immediate and often polarized interpretation. The palace can no longer control the narrative with press releases or scheduled interviews alone. Instead, they must compete with misinformation, viral speculation, and digital activism. This has required a more sophisticated, rapid, and nuanced approach to public relations, an evolution that hasn't always gone smoothly. In many cases, it's not only the formal media apparatus that shapes perceptions, but also public memory and emotion. Princess Diana's story remains deeply ingrained in the public psyche, not just as a tragic narrative, but as a moral compass by which later royal behavior is measured. Her vulnerability, accessibility, and warmth helped redefine what a royal could be, and her legacy continues to shape expectations of those who follow. In contrast, controversies such as Prince Andrew's association with Jeffrey Epstein have not only damaged individual reputations but cast a shadow over the entire institution, illustrating how one member's actions can reverberate through the monarchy as a whole. The Epstein scandal was particularly damaging because it touched on both criminality and questions of moral responsibility. The royal family's initial responses were criticized as evasive, and Prince Andrew's televised interview intended to clear his name only deepened public suspicion and ridicule. Ultimately, he was forced to step back from public duties entirely, his royal patronages withdrawn, his HRH title informally retired. This marked one of the most severe consequences ever faced by a royal in recent history, and it was a powerful reminder that even those born into privilege are not immune to accountability, especially when public outrage reaches a certain threshold. These events have accelerated broader discussions about institutional reform and accountability. Should royal titles be subject to greater oversight? Should public funding be conditional on conduct? Should the line of succession itself be re-examined in light of changing values? While these questions are unlikely to result in immediate structural upheaval, they are no longer confined to fringe discourse. Mainstream conversations about monarchy now regularly include discussions about constitutional clarity, fiscal transparency, and cultural relevance. There is a growing awareness that tradition alone is not sufficient justification for power or privilege. The institution must earn its place, again and again, in the hearts and minds of each new generation. Even among loyal supporters of the monarchy, there is recognition that change is inevitable. The idea of a slimmed-down monarchy has gained traction, one where only a core group of working royals represent the crown, reducing costs and focusing public attention. King Charles has already taken steps in this direction, emphasizing efficiency and trimming the number of senior royals in active public roles. This not only addresses financial concerns but also offers a symbolic gesture of modernization, a monarchy that is leaner, less ostentatious, and more aligned with public expectations. However, streamlining comes with its own risks. A smaller royal team means greater visibility and pressure on fewer individuals. With Harry and Meghan out of the fold and Prince Andrew permanently sidelined, the burden falls more heavily on Charles, Camilla, William, and Catherine. As they age, the next generation will need to step up, yet questions remain about how George, Charlotte, and Louis will navigate a future that is both hyper-connected and hypercritical. Their lives will be lived in a digital world where anonymity is rare and public commentary is relentless. Preparing them for that reality, while preserving their mental and emotional well-being, will be one of the royal family's greatest challenges in the decades to come. What remains constant, even amid all this change, is the royal family's role as a national and cultural symbol. In times of national mourning, such as the death of Queen Elizabeth II, or national celebration, such as royal weddings or jubilees, the monarchy still serves as a focal point for collective experience. It offers rituals, language, and imagery that speak to continuity, identity, and belonging. These functions are deeply embedded in British life not just through pageantry but through education, media, and even geography. The monarchy is stitched into the architecture of British society, and disentangling it, if ever attempted, would be a slow and fraught process. And yet, cultural symbols are not immune to obsolescence. They survive not by resisting change but by evolving alongside it. The British monarchy has done this repeatedly over the centuries, transforming from absolute rule to constitutional symbolism, from imperial command to domestic service, from aloofness to emotional engagement. Each transformation has required sacrifice, adaptation, and occasionally confrontation with its own failures. The modern age simply demands more of the same, but at a faster pace and under greater scrutiny. It is in this light that one must view the royal family's future not as a fixed lineage but as a living institution, shaped by history but not immune to time. Its power lies not in legislation but in imagination, in the stories it tells, the values it reflects, and the image it projects. If it can continue to adapt, acknowledge its flaws, and serve as a touchstone of identity in a world of flux, it may well endure. But if it resists evolution or loses public trust entirely, it will face the same fate that awaits any institution unable to justify its place: slow but irreversible decline. Thus, the royal family in the modern age is not a singular narrative of scandal or glory but a complex interplay of tradition and transformation. Its relevance depends not just on its past but on its ability to reflect the present and anticipate the future. In a world where power is no longer defined by inheritance alone, and where trust must be earned rather than assumed, the royal family must constantly reassert its value not through words alone, but through consistent, visible, and meaningful acts of service. Only then can it remain more than just a historical curiosity, still a symbol, but also a living part of the national and global conversation. The British monarchy, once a symbol of absolute authority and divine right, now stands at a delicate crossroads in the 21st century, a ceremonial institution faced with the unrelenting pace of societal evolution, increased demands for accountability, and the ongoing glare of media scrutiny. While the crown remains a symbol of tradition and continuity, its role in modern society has become more performative and representational than directive. Yet even as it retains its place at the heart of Britain's constitutional and cultural identity, the monarchy is under more pressure than ever to justify its existence, particularly in a world where privilege by birthright is increasingly at odds with ideals of merit, transparency, and equality. The growing list of royal scandals has catalyzed public debates that once simmered on the margins but are now center stage. Incidents such as the abdication crisis of Edward VIII, Princess Margaret's thwarted romance, Prince Charles's highly publicized divorce, Prince Andrew's ties to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, and Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's explosive interviews have all chipped away at the mystique that once insulated the royal family from public judgment. Each scandal acts as a magnifying glass through which broader societal concerns are refracted: questions about race, gender, power, institutional complicity, and generational change. As such, the royal family's future can no longer be considered solely through the lens of tradition or even national identity. It must now be examined as a dynamic negotiation between history and progress, symbolism and substance, privacy and publicity. The monarchy's constitutional role in the United Kingdom is, in practice, limited. It acts primarily as a ceremonial body head, bound by precedent and tradition to remain politically neutral. However, the symbolic weight it carries is considerable. The Queen, or now the King, serves as a living symbol of national unity and continuity, anchoring the state during transitions and crises. Yet this symbolism, while emotionally resonant for many, is also increasingly viewed as antiquated by younger generations. Polling consistently suggests that support for the monarchy is aging. While older citizens tend to revere the institution as part of their lived history, many younger Britons question its relevance and expense, particularly amid growing awareness of historical injustices tied to colonialism and aristocratic privilege. This generational divide is perhaps one of the most critical indicators of the monarchy's future. As younger demographics become more engaged in social justice, climate change, and economic inequality, they are less likely to support institutions they perceive as elitist, inaccessible, or unaccountable. The very idea of hereditary privilege stands in stark contrast to values rooted in equality and meritocracy. In a world reshaped by the internet and global connectivity, where anyone can build a platform and speak truth to power, the idea that some individuals are born into greatness and taxpayer-funded luxury feels increasingly outdated to many. This cultural evolution poses an existential challenge to the monarchy: adapt in a way that reflects changing values, or risk becoming irrelevant to the very citizens it claims to represent. The royal family has, in some respects, attempted to modernize. The younger royals, particularly Prince William and Catherine, have adopted a more approachable, emotionally attuned public presence. Initiatives around mental health, early childhood development, and climate change reflect an effort to address causes that resonate with the public, especially younger audiences. These efforts are often well received, suggesting that the monarchy can still play a valuable symbolic role when it aligns itself with contemporary issues. However, such initiatives are also tightly managed, sometimes criticized as superficial or performative. The balancing act between substance and symbolism, sincerity and strategy, is a delicate one, and it is made more difficult by the family's inability to respond candidly to criticism or engage in overt political discourse. One of the most illustrative examples of this tension is the departure of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle from royal duties. Their decision to step back, citing mental health challenges, racism within the institution, and media harassment, was a seismic moment that laid bare many of the monarchy's modern dilemmas. Their exit generated global debate about the role of race, tradition, and family in the monarchy's future. For some, it revealed deep systemic flaws: an institution unable or unwilling to support a biracial woman navigating intense public scrutiny and a rigid hierarchy. For others, it was a betrayal of duty and a politicization of personal grievances. Regardless of interpretation, the moment served as a catalyst for reflection. What kind of institution is the monarchy, and who does it truly serve? These questions have no easy answers. The monarchy's role as a unifying symbol relies on the perception of impartiality and moral integrity. When members of the royal family are embroiled in scandals or perceived as out of touch, that symbolic power erodes. Public trust is essential to the monarchy's survival, not legal trust, as it is not an elected body, but cultural trust, the kind that grants legitimacy through affection, nostalgia, and respect. Scandals, therefore, do more than embarrass. They destabilize the emotional and moral contract between the monarchy and its people. Each breach of conduct, each moment of perceived hypocrisy, weakens the institution's symbolic foundation, particularly in an era where accountability is no longer optional but demanded. The question then arises: can the monarchy evolve fast enough to survive? Evolution, in this context, means more than embracing technology or modern fashion. It means grappling with uncomfortable truths, revisiting institutional structures, and perhaps even acknowledging past injustices. This is no easy feat. Monarchical institutions by nature are conservative, designed to resist rapid change in favor of continuity and stability. But the paradox is that survival in a modern world requires adaptability. The monarchy must appear timeless while also evolving, sacred but accessible, powerful but humble. It must offer a sense of history while demonstrating a commitment to the future. One potential path forward is the continuation of the slimmed-down model, which King Charles has reportedly championed. This approach would focus royal duties on a smaller group of senior members, reduce the financial burden on taxpayers, and present a more focused public face. It reflects a recognition that the royal family cannot afford to appear bloated or indulgent in a world of rising inequality and public skepticism. Reducing the number of active royals could also minimize the chances of scandal, or at least contain the fallout when controversies occur. However, this model also places enormous pressure on the remaining few to embody the institution's ideals without faltering, a near impossible task in today's unforgiving media landscape. Another avenue for modernization lies in deeper transparency. The royal family has long operated behind a veil of tradition and discretion, with financial disclosures, internal communications and decision-making processes kept opaque. While some level of mystique is necessary to maintain symbolic power, increasing transparency particularly around finances, public spending and institutional practices could help build public trust. Demonstrating ethical leadership, not just ceremonial leadership, is critical. If the monarchy wishes to serve as a moral compass, it must be willing to hold itself to the standards it represents. Moreover, the monarchy must engage more directly with its colonial legacy. The British Empire, of which the crown was a central symbol, left a lasting impact on vast swaths of the world, many of which are still reckoning with that history. Calls for reparations, apologies, and historical education are growing louder across the Commonwealth. The future monarch must decide whether to maintain a nostalgic version of Britain's global past or actively participate in healing its legacy. Silence or evasion on these issues risks alienating younger, global audiences and undermining the monarchy's claim to moral leadership. An honest confrontation with imperial history, while painful, could lay the groundwork for a monarchy that is not only more inclusive but also more relevant in a multicultural, post-colonial world. Perhaps the most intangible, yet vital, component of the monarchy's future is its emotional intelligence, its capacity to engage not just politically or ceremonially, but emotionally with the people it serves. Queen Elizabeth II, despite her often stoic demeanor, embodied a kind of quiet emotional presence. Her consistent visibility, restrained commentary, and unwavering performance of duty created a sense of national reliability. As the family moves forward under King Charles III and eventually Prince William, they must find their own emotional cadence, one that resonates with contemporary values without appearing inauthentic. Emotional connection is increasingly important in a world saturated with human stories, vulnerable expressions, and individual advocacy. Royals are no longer abstract symbols. They are personalities expected to empathize, relate, and even suffer publicly. Ultimately, the future of the monarchy depends not just on those born into it, but on the public's ongoing willingness to accept and invest in its existence. Monarchy is not inevitable. It is a contract, unwritten, emotional, cultural, between the people and a family that claims to represent them. That contract can be revoked, either gradually through apathy or suddenly through political action. The institution must constantly earn its place, not through coercion or nostalgia, but through relevance and respect. It must inspire, not command, serve, not dominate. If the royal family can navigate this transition, embracing accountability, confronting its history, simplifying its structure, and building emotional rapport, it may yet endure for generations to come. It will not be the monarchy of past centuries, nor should it be. It will be a quieter institution, more symbolic than directive, more personal than hierarchical, and more vulnerable than it dares to admit. But perhaps in that vulnerability lies its future strength. Not in grandeur but in humility. Not in birthright but in service. Not in untouchable splendor, but in human resilience. The crown may glitter less, but it might matter more. As the British monarchy navigates the complexities of the 21st century, it stands at a crucial threshold between its storied past and an uncertain future. It has long served as a symbol of continuity, history, and national identity, an institution built on ritual and reverence that has evolved through centuries of upheaval, from dynastic wars and revolutions to imperial expansion and decolonization. Yet today, it faces new challenges that no amount of ceremonial pageantry can mask. Social change, generational shifts in values, increasing demand for transparency, and a public more empowered than ever to question, critique, and even reject the structures that once seemed immutable. One of the most striking features of the modern monarchy is the growing contrast between its symbolic function and the lived realities of the society it represents. While many people still admire the tradition, stability, and sense of heritage the monarchy conveys, a significant and rising proportion of citizens, especially younger generations, see the institution as outdated, elitist, and at times ethically compromised. The long-standing justification for monarchy, that it provides apolitical unity and national identity, now faces a public increasingly concerned with meritocracy, accountability, and justice. The traditional deference once shown to royalty has diminished, replaced by a culture of skepticism that demands authenticity, responsibility, and moral clarity. Scandals have played a major role in exposing the fault lines within the institution. From the abdication of Edward VIII and the tragedy of Princess Diana to the controversies surrounding Prince Andrew and the rupture caused by Prince Harry and Meghan's departure, each crisis has peeled back the layers of royal mystique and exposed the fragility beneath. These are not merely personal missteps or family dramas. They become national and global flashpoints for debates about power, privilege, race, gender, and institutional integrity. The royal family, once protected by silence and loyalty, is now at the mercy of a media environment that thrives on exposure and conflict. It is no longer enough to project dignity from behind palace walls. The monarchy must reckon with its own humanity in public, repeatedly and transparently. In this environment, the future of the monarchy hinges not on nostalgia or tradition alone, but on its ability to adapt and resonate with contemporary values. That adaptation is already in motion, albeit cautiously. King Charles III has signaled a desire for a slimmed-down monarchy, likely in response to both fiscal scrutiny and the changing political atmosphere. This approach, if executed effectively, could foster a more focused, efficient, and relatable royal family, one that embodies service rather than entitlement, empathy rather than aloofness. A reduced royal footprint may also limit the risks associated with scandal and overexposure, concentrating public attention on fewer, more prepared individuals. Prince William and Catherine, as the future of the monarchy, face the task of embodying this new royal ethos. They are perhaps the most carefully managed and publicly admired members of the family, seen as both dignified and accessible. But the expectations placed on them are immense. They are not only expected to carry the institution into a new era but also to model a kind of aspirational, morally grounded leadership in a world that is more divided, more vocal, and more critical than ever before. Their success will depend on their ability to remain emotionally attuned to public sentiment while maintaining the decorum that the role demands, a fine line to walk in an age of relentless media scrutiny. Meanwhile, the monarchy must confront broader structural and historical issues that cannot be resolved through public relations alone. The lingering shadows of empire, colonialism, and inherited wealth are now part of the public discourse in ways that were once unthinkable. Calls for reparations, apologies, and meaningful engagement with the past have emerged not just from academia or activism but from within the Commonwealth itself. The monarchy's future cannot be disentangled from this legacy. Its credibility will depend in part on its willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, to engage with the communities affected by Britain's imperial past, and to do so with humility rather than defensiveness. In addition, the issue of transparency will remain central to the monarchy's survival. For decades, the royal family has operated within a bubble of discretion, protected by legal exemptions and minimal public oversight. But this lack of openness increasingly undermines public trust. Questions about the use of public funds, the allocation of royal duties, and the mechanisms of internal decision-making are no longer easily deflected. People want to know not just what the monarchy symbolizes, but how it functions and who it truly serves. The future monarchy must therefore become more accountable, not just legally but culturally. It must earn trust through its actions, not simply expected as a matter of tradition. Despite all these challenges, the monarchy still has assets that could sustain it through turbulent times. It remains a powerful symbol, not just within Britain but globally. Its ceremonial function, its historical depth, and its ability to command attention offer unique soft power potential. During times of crisis or national mourning, the royal family can act as a stabilizing force, offering a sense of shared identity and continuity. It also plays a unique role in diplomacy and public service, attending to causes that often receive less political attention. These roles, though largely symbolic, are not without value. They offer the monarchy a way to remain relevant, provided they are exercised with empathy and modern sensibility. Crucially, the monarchy must recognize that its survival is no longer a given. It is contingent on the public's ongoing support, a support that must be constantly cultivated, not assumed. This support may not always be rooted in admiration or loyalty. It may stem instead from pragmatism, from a belief that a constitutional monarchy is preferable to a head of state selected by political means. But even this pragmatic support is vulnerable if the monarchy appears out of touch or unwilling to reform. The public is no longer content with pageantry alone. They expect purpose. They want their royal family to reflect the best of the nation's values, not simply its history, but its future. That future will be shaped not only by the choices of individual royals but by the broader cultural and political environment in which they operate. As Britain becomes more diverse, more globalized, and more introspective about its past, the monarchy must become a mirror of that transformation rather than a relic of what came before. It must become more inclusive in representation, more honest in its storytelling, and more courageous in its self-examination. It must recognize that tradition is not static, it is living, breathing, and constantly evolving. The crown will survive not by standing still but by moving gracefully with the times, finding strength not in superiority but in service, not in distance but in connection. In this way, the future of the British monarchy remains unwritten. It may endure as a beloved, if symbolic, institution adapted to modern expectations and stripped of excess. Or it may gradually diminish, its relevance eroded by indifference and its symbolism overtaken by newer, more resonant narratives of leadership and unity. What is certain, however, is that the next chapter will not be shaped by ceremony alone. It will be shaped by the choices the monarchy makes, by the honesty with which it confronts its past, and by the authenticity it brings to its role in a world that no longer bows by default.